My name is Malaka Gharib, and today we are doing a wonderful spotlight panel with the artist Adrian Tomine, who has come out with a new book, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist. As I said, my name is Malaka. I'm the author of the graphic memoir, I Was Their American Dream, and Adrian has been a huge role model in illustration and comics for me since I was very young, and it's so exciting to talk to him today about this new book. So yeah, are you ready, Adrian?
I am, and thanks again for doing this, Malaka. It's an honor to be here with you.
So basically, this book looks at kind of all these touch points and moments in your career over the past few decades, the highs and the lows. Why did you want to write a book like this now, at this point in your career?
I think there's an insecure part of my brain that's always afraid that people are going to get sick of me and my work, and even people who might have enjoyed my work in the past. Like I've had the experience of being a big fan of an artist or a band or a filmmaker or something, and even though they kind of are consistently great, if it's too much of the same thing over and over again, maybe my enthusiasm for their work starts to drop off a little bit. So that's always kind of nagging me in the back of my brain when I'm trying to think about what I want to do when I finish a book. So it's, you know, it's sort of, it's limited by my ability, but what I try to do is make each book somehow different from the one prior. I don't think I have it in me to be like Stanley Kubrick, where he never repeated himself at all and every single movie was totally different, but I at least try and challenge myself to make it different from the prior book. So when I finished Killing and Dying, that was a short story collection. It was fiction. It was in full color for the most part. And it was pretty dark and somber. So I tried to kind of do the opposite of all those things. And for me, the best avenue was autobiography or memoir. And I had this idea for this book in my mind for a long time, or at least I was accumulating material that ended up forming this book. And that's one of the notebooks that I started out the earliest drafts of this book in. So that was basically the idea, was that I had this material that I knew I eventually wanted to do something with, and I wanted to try and do something different from the last book.
Great. Yeah, I was wondering, how do you, so you're trying to keep fresh, basically?
I guess so. I guess that's a way to put it. Yeah, as much as possible for someone who's been publishing since they were 16 years old.
Yeah. I keep thinking about how interesting success is. Like, the lessons that you learn about success as you grow up, they're just not what you expect. So for example, like, you know, when something good happens to you in your career, it's like you really only care about a handful of people thinking or appreciating that or noting that, being recognized by a handful of people, or that at the end of the day, like, success often presents itself in unexpected ways, like the honor of being interviewed by Terry Gross or going to dinner with the artist Richard Sala. You know, it sort of presents itself in these really kind of like tiny private ways. And what have you learned about what success means, or more like what it actually is, on your way up?
Well, I mean, that's what a lot of what the book is about, I think, was that experience of having what I guess to me felt like successes, and then how they didn't always necessarily bring me the happiness or the fulfillment that I had imagined that they would. And also coming to the realization that a lot of things that seem like big successes to me were essentially meaningless to a lot of other people. And so, like, there were many times where I had to call up my parents, and before I could tell them what the accomplishment was, I had to give this whole preamble of, okay, so there's a magazine called The New Yorker, and they asked me to draw a cover for them, and things like that. And that's still ongoing, and it's hard to imagine what an alternative to be. I can't think of what would be something that I could just blurt out to a random fellow parent that I meet at the playground or my parents without having to sort of do this embarrassing explanation of why it's meaningful to me. But I think it was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to get into that subject matter in this book because it's, a lot of it is sort of like an inherent humble brag kind of thing. But to me, it was just, I felt okay taking that risk eventually because I thought that my take on it wasn't so much, I always dreamed of this experience and then I got it and it was great. Like no one would want to read that book. But to me, a lot of it was both how amazing it is that I've had these over and over again. I've had these opportunities where I keep thinking if like the teenage version of me could see this happening right now, he would be totally blown away. And then at the same time, not being able to really explain to other people why that experience was so meaningful to me, or as is the case with my life now, like immediately thereafter having to go, help my 5-year-old daughter go to the bathroom or something like that. I've never had that experience where I feel like I'm basking in success and it's just ongoing and everybody else is aware of it. It's a private thing, I think, for the most part. And I was trying to capture what a strange experience that is, particularly in the sort of niche world of being a cartoonist. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like being a famous actor or something like that where, everybody saw you on TV last night, so that's no explanation necessary,
Yeah. I mean, I think the comics industry, this is a Comic-Con event, right? So I guess everybody is a super nerd. So I'll feel free to speak openly about comics, I guess. But a comic of mine was like sold at Fantagraphics, and like the Larry who works at Fantagraphics said that he liked my comic, and I almost like died. And my mom was like, I don't understand why this is such a big deal for you. I'm like, it's a big deal. It's so big. And I had to also like go back and explain everything. And in the end, I only wanted my mom to appreciate, I just wanted my mom I want her to be so proud of me, but to having to go through several layers of explanation, it's like explaining a joke and then the punchline doesn't actually deliver. So it's like, it's not really worth it in the end. But I thought that you did such a beautiful job of towing that line between humble bragging, and also like trying to explain the mercurialness of success and how it doesn't really matter whether you're a cartoonist or not. It's something that we all grapple with, the highs and lows. I was thinking about how it's just kind of a weird time in general. We're living in the pandemic. It's kind of humiliating in a way to have to like live through a time when we're worried about respiratory droplets and wearing masks and like social distancing and thinking about all these super clinical ways of protecting ourselves. And early on in the pandemic, you had drawn this illustration of you in your home with your 2 children and your wife, like all in one scene, and there was complete chaos.
Yeah.
I was thinking about like how something as big as a pandemic, how it might change our idea of success. What does success mean to you now, just in general?
That's a good question. I think, it's interesting starting now to do these interviews and kind of having the job of promoting a book, because for the last, 3 or 4 months, I kind of made a mental switch, and I just decided that I was going to be, a homeschool teacher and a like a maid and a butler and a I just sort of put away all ambitions of being an artist or being creative for the most part. If I had a little bit of energy at the end of the night, I'd do a little sketchbook drawing or something. But the way things worked out in our house, it was just not going to be possible for both me and my wife to sort of maintain our regular work schedule. We have a 10-year-old who is pretty independent, and she kind of just takes her laptop and goes into her room and does her schoolwork, and then when she's done, she gets on Google Hangouts with her friends and they talk. And but a 5-year-old is different. So I've really, I don't know, I guess the last 4 months pretty much just devoted every day to my idea of success. To answer your question, was like, did we get through all the schoolwork that we were supposed to get to, and did I make breakfast and clean it up, and then make lunch and clean it up, and you know, maybe if I'm lucky, get them out into the fresh air for a little bit. So yeah, I really haven't thought of myself as an artist or anything like that for a while now. So the idea of success is hard to gauge, which in one sense might be good, because we have no idea how things are going to go releasing a book right now, and all this we had like a big tour plan that didn't work out, obviously. So I think in a way it's good that the whole pandemic kind of has already eroded all my expectations and notions of success. So I'm happy just to even do something like this, really.
So stars, they're just like us. They're dadding around.
Yeah, definitely.
So for so many cartoonists, like you've crossed like all the big ticket items off the big bucket list of like making it in the big time, you know, like drawing covers for the New Yorker, getting published by Drawn and Quarterly. I mean, like what possibly else is left for you to do on your bucket list, if you even have one? What else is on it?
I mean, to be honest, being published by Drawn and Quarterly was really the only thing on any kind of bucket list that I had when I started out. To be honest, I actually wasn't that familiar with the New Yorker myself when I was growing up. We didn't have it in the house, and so I was too ignorant for that to even be an ambition of mine. And yeah, I'm grateful for everything that's come along, but to be honest, it all sort of feels like extra kind of unexpected success beyond becoming a published cartoonist. My ambition wasn't even to be a full-time cartoonist. It was just to be able to have my work published in some way. And I, for a long time, was like I would work at a restaurant, or I was a delivery driver for a copy shop for a while. And then I would draw my comics on the side. And I would also do the same thing when I was in school. I would do my schoolwork during the day, and at night do some comics work. And I guess I'd sort of just grown accustomed to that. And if I could have continued doing that and just be freed of the burden of having to self-publish my work, then that would have been success to me. So a lot of this other stuff has been, unexpected and not exactly things that I chased. Like I didn't set out to do these. A lot of these things weren't really goals of mine, but they were things that came along, and I did my best to meet those challenges. I don't know what else is left. I mean, I guess I'm not super ambitious in terms of, I'm not like a big career climbing kind of person, at least in the world of comics. I think a lot of my life is struggling to maintain stasis. Like there's enough forces pulling me forward and changing things around me that a lot of times the struggle is to, how long can I stay in this apartment, or how long can I maintain this work routine that I'm on, or how long can I keep this amazing working relationship I have with Drawn and Quarterly, where I just kind of work in private, and when I'm done, I send something to them, and they do a great job of putting it out there in the world. So in terms of comics, a lot of it is just, I'd love to be able to just keep going in the way that I have been for so long. Beyond that, I've been doing stuff that is a totally different world outside of comics, which is trying to do stuff in the world of like movies and TV, and like all the rules are different, and everything that I've learned doesn't necessarily apply, and any self-importance I might have built up over these years doing comics is immediately, exploded. So that's a challenge, but it's again, it's anything that happens in that regard feels like a bonus to having achieved my main goal in life, was to be a published cartoonist.
So what are these movie projects?
It's
Can you talk
nothing.
about them?
What's that?
Can you talk about them?
Not too much, not yet. But there's a couple things. Well, there was a while back, I tried to make a TV show, and that I can just mention that because it didn't work out. So that didn't happen, but I went through a long process of working on it. And now there's a couple film things that are in the works in various stages, which I can't say anything about yet. But it's a fun challenge. But there are many times where I end a meeting or a phone call or something and have this feeling of great gratitude that no matter what, I can go over to my drawing board and make a comic and tell whatever story I want, and not have to wait for someone's permission or seek funding or anything like that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm excited to whatever it ends up being.
Might be nothing, but we'll see. I have a friend who's made a few movies, and his advice to me, which I always find very hard to heed, but he said, don't tell anyone about a movie until it's in the theaters. Because before that, it could just disappear, and people will, for the rest of your life, be like, what about that thing when you were on that Comic-Con panel, you once said you were doing that, and it'll haunt you for the rest of your life.
Oh no. All right. That's good advice to know when I get a movie deal or something.
Yes. But like I said, it's hard to obey.
I wanted to talk to you a lot about race and ethnicity. I was rereading a lot of your books before this panel, and I was really struck and impressed and grateful that you had introduced so many themes about race in your early work from up to 2 decades ago, or maybe probably earlier than that. Interracial couples, Asian people, and it's surprising because it feels like over the past few years since the Me Too movement, it's there's been this huge outpouring of POC representation that's been a part of wanting more representation of women, wanting more representation of POC voices in movies, comics, books, you name it, right? But you've been doing this for a long time, and Shortcomings was, I feel like it was everything that we've already we were saying now again, but decades ago. I don't know when it was published.
A decade at least.
Decade ago. And you had this joke that that was in one of your comics that was win with win.
Yeah.
I love that joke. I love
only some people would have gotten the pun of that, but
love that.
Well, I think.
How was that received at the time? That was what I wanted to ask you. How was it received in the time, and did people get it, and what does it mean now?
It's been an interesting experience. I think one of the issues that I faced was that I myself didn't grow up extremely conscious of race. I'm a 4th generation Japanese American, and I just grew up in a lot of towns along the West Coast that I guess I just didn't feel like I was part of a big community per se. Like I didn't feel particularly discriminated against, but I also didn't feel like I had a community based on background that I was a part of. Like I didn't go to a Japanese American church or anything like that. And so when I started putting out comics, it was never really on my mind. If there's some of those things that you're referencing that I think just sort of naturally filtered in, and it wasn't like a conscious effort, but I was really not thinking about those issues for the most part. And the first time I really started considering it was when my work got out in the world enough that I started getting response and started getting letters from people, or I started doing interviews with people. And particularly from people within the Asian American community, I started getting a lot of feedback about my comics being too white, that I was not representing my experience or my community enough through the work because there were too many white characters or the settings were too generic or something like that. And that was hard for me because I felt like I was truly, as much as possible, portraying my experiences and my circumstances in the work. So I think the first time I really started thinking about it was when I was getting sort of a negative response from some people within the Asian American community. And then that continued. There was sort of a long, if I was going to do an interview for an Asian American publication, this was a long time ago, this was like 20 years ago, there was always inevitably going to be a question about like, why aren't I dealing more with issues of race in my work? Like there's sort of some background details, or some characters might be ambiguously ethnic or something, but I'm not addressing it head on. And so those questions came up a lot. And then when I did the book Shortcomings, that was, I think, a good maybe 10 years after that started. And it was my attempt to sort of take up that challenge and really go directly into some of that material. My sense was that it wasn't exactly the book that some of those earlier critics had been hoping for. It was like I addressed some issues and I portrayed some characters who were Asian or Asian American, but I didn't quite do it in exactly the way they'd been hoping for. So again, there was like a different version of a negative response. So that it was sort of an ongoing frustration for me. It was hard to sometimes figure out what I was doing honestly in my work and what I was doing that was pandering to critics. And then even more significantly, what I was doing in kind of a teenage or 20-something rebellion against what those critics were saying. Like sort of, I feel that a little bit when I look back at some of that work, that I'm almost intentionally defying expectations or disappointing some critics or something. And so the worst book tour of my entire life was the one for Shortcomings. To have to, because I was able to work on it pretty much in private, and I was really challenging myself to go a little further in some of the characterization than I felt maybe comfortable with, but I wanted to create a work that was kind of unsettling or challenging in that way. So I was able to create the work, but it never occurred to me that then I would have to then go out and travel around the country and face people and talk about it. So I've told this before, but when I started that book tour, I would get up and say, oh yeah, I was really influenced by the writing of Philip Roth when I wrote this book. And a lot of the things in the story are very thinly veiled autobiography, and it's not actually true to life, but a lot of it is very true to my own thoughts and feelings. And then as the reactions started to become more obviously negative, and I started seeing things online where people were really angry at the main character in the book. Like there was a time where I would just do a Google search for like Ben Tanaka or something like that, and you'd see these different things that would come up. And so over the course of that tour, I like very pathetically changed my whole pitch, and I'd get up there and go, well, this book is a critique. It's a fictional critique of a type of Asian American that I don't approve of. And so by the end of the tour, it was a whole different book supposedly.
That was then though. What about now? How about
yeah?
yeah?
You know, I have to say I'm really surprised because I think I first put the book out maybe 12 years ago or something like that, and I never go back and reread my work. So it's always just sort of nagging in the back of my mind. Oh, I did that book, and it was always for a long time I was thinking, maybe I don't know how that's going to age, and I was a little bit concerned about it. And then in the last few years, I've been asked to come talk at some college classes, and I've met some people who've read it recently, younger people, and it's a really different reaction now. I got to say, I used to be terrified. I used to turn down any invitation to a college class, especially like an Asian American studies class, if they wanted to talk about shortcomings, because I had a few experiences where I felt like genuinely shaken, and I felt like I kind of left the campus trembling. And so when I started easing back into that a little bit in the last few years, I was really kind of surprised. It's a especially like people who are freshmen or just undergrads in college now, their reaction was so different than when the book first came out. And I can only imagine that has something to do with just shifts in our culture and generational attitudes. And I don't know, you could probably speak to it better than I could, but it was a relief, I gotta say.
Yeah, I read it actually maybe like a couple of years ago as I was working on my own book, I actually was so upset by how good it was that I was like, I'm never reading any more books by like comic books about Asian American people, because it's just gonna like make me really jealous and not be able to like write my own book. So yeah, I loved it. I mean, I loved it. I mean,
Well, but I'll say that what I liked about what you were able to do in your book, which I was not doing at all, which I couldn't do, was that you were able to write it without any. I feel like I wrote it through 10,000 different veils of second guessing and imagining how it would be received and responding to that imagined response and everything. And I felt like you were able to write your book. Maybe I'm wrong, but it felt in a very free way, in an open-hearted way. And I think a lot of the appeal of it for me was that it felt like just a very direct expression from your heart to the reader, which is, that's something that I'm trying to do a little bit more in this new book. But at the time of Shortcomings was very difficult for me, just because I was probably at the most self-conscious period of my life and my career, and just having sort of a insecurity as an artist and as a person too.
would you ever write a book about how your relationship with your identity now at this stage in your life? A more honest one. Shortcomings was fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's possible. I think, as you know, it's hard to approach that topic without involving other people, especially family members. And that's a whole other audience that sometimes I can get paralyzed about imagining them reading it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I feel like you did a good job of being honest and open about your family, but you also didn't get into anything terribly incendiary or anything like that. Was there anything that you were worried about your parents reading or your family?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's the scary part about memoir. But at the same time, memoir isn't always about telling your deepest, darkest secrets. I learned that on Google when I looked up how to write a memoir.
That was your education, huh?
Yeah, that was my education. Well, moving off of that, well, I really do hope that you write a comic about your identity, because the thing actually about you that I love is that you, it's like whatever is in your, like you're able to like really like express yourself so well in comics. And I feel like just walking through your emotional like wokeness like identity journey, I would love to be on that ride.
Okay.
So,
Well,
just put that out there, putting that out there.
yeah, and it's definitely it gets interesting when you become a parent too. For me, like a lot of
Yeah.
that comes up, and being in a interracial marriage, that brings up a lot of issues as well. So there's a lot of stuff, but if I can somehow outlive everybody else in my life, I think I'd be able to do a really a really good about it.
Okay, we'll wait till everyone's dead. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
So my last few questions for you is a question that I fear as a you've been drawing comics like your whole life. I feel like I like worry. This is a question that I want to know for myself. Is drawing comics still fun? Or, yeah.
Is it for you?
I mean, yeah, it is, but you do it full time, like all the time.
Mm-hmm. Um, it's it's more fun than a lot of other jobs that I that I could have. I'll say that, and it's more fun than a lot of aspects of my life that are just necessitated by being a parent now. But you know, I, I I think working on the book and talking about it now has sort of made me think about that very question a lot. And at first I started getting kind of depressed, thinking, yeah, it's not really that fun for me right now. But then I really thought back to when I started out, and it wasn't that fun for me then either. It was really, when I really think about it and I'm honest with myself, like people think like, oh, you got a real head start on this career because you knew what you wanted to do and you were a teenager and you were foregoing all these other things, like you weren't going to parties and you weren't going on dates and you were just staying home and drawing because you had your career in your mind. But the truth is, I didn't have any of those opportunities that I was intentionally foregoing. I was doing the work because those other options weren't available to me. And it was a way to justify sitting home alone on a Friday night and not feeling completely miserable for myself. And to this day, that will still go on, where it's even if I don't have an actual deadline or something, I'll invent some kind of work task for myself to fill up the time. And I think that there are definitely phases that I can get into on a project where I'm really enjoying the process. And I can definitely enjoy completing a project and feeling like I did this, and that feels like an accomplishment to me. But a lot of times, especially on a long book, like by my standards, this new one is a long book. And so sometimes when you're like halfway through and there's other things you'd rather be doing, especially when with kids, like it's really hard for me sometimes to say, no, I can't go with you guys to see that Pixar movie or whatever, because I got to stay home and get more pages done of my book. So a lot of times it does feel like just this like kind of slowly pushing a boulder up a mountain or something like that. But like I said, there are a lot of things, including some of these other artistic challenges that I'm tasking myself with right now, that really make me appreciate things about being a cartoonist, especially the freedom that it involves and the cheapness of being able to produce it. And also, for the most part, I just really like working independently. Like I like the idea of going into a room and listening to music and just being by myself while I draw for a while. So that's definitely enjoyable.
That's a nice feeling. That's why I like being a cartoonist too.
Uh-huh. Well, you have both worlds, right? You work around people, and then you get to go lock yourself in your room and
Yeah.
draw.
This is a question that I wanted to ask you as a fan. This is a cover that you drew for the New Yorker in 2007. And when I think I was maybe in college, college junior, when I saw this cover. I had just come from a trip to New York City with my mom and my sister, and you drew this, and I want to know, what book was this?
Oh God.
I have a guess, but
Yeah. Well, your guess is probably right. What is your guess?
The Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, it might be. I think it's definitely some Salinger book because of those diagonal lines on the corner. A lot of them had that same cover design. Yeah, that was actually based on, in a way, it was based on my wife's younger sister, who was at the time, I don't think she was even in high school yet. I can't remember. She might have even been in like junior high or something like that. So it kind of looks like what she looked like at the time. And to me, it sort of summed up some sort of aspect of her personality at that point in her life. But then strangely enough, she ended up growing up and becoming a big comics fan, and interned at Drawn and Quarterly for a summer, and is now a very good animator and cartoonist sometimes too.
Cool. Wow. It's nice to have the backstory of this
Mm-hmm.
drawing that I always want to know about. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you now. Is there anything else that you want to add and tell people at Comic-Con now that you have the floor?
Not
Say it.
Not that I can think of, other than I'm grateful to anyone who is watching this, and I'm very sad that I'm not actually in San Diego. It's been a long time since I've been at Comic-Con, and I was actually looking forward to getting back to California, getting back to Comic-Con. I thought this was the perfect book to do that for, since there are some scenes that take place at Comic-Con when I was younger. And yeah, it was going to be a whole family vacation. I was going to bring the family, and we're going to stay there beyond the convention and go to the beach and all those things. So I'm sad to not be there, and I'm grateful to have readers and people who would watch something like this at Comic-Con. Still, as much as my career has moved in sort of an unexpected way towards books and the New Yorker and things like that, it really was comic books that started everything for me, and I certainly wouldn't be here without that.
That sounds great. Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thanks for doing it. I appreciate it, and I recommend that everyone checks out Malaka's book. It's very good, so please check it out.